Welcome to today's webinar titled First Look, What Really Happened at the Minnesota Legislature. My name is Bill Walsh. I'm the Director of Communications at Center of the American Experiment. My colleague, Bill Glahn, adjunct, what's your title?
Policy.
Adjunct Policy Fellow. So you see Bill on Twitter. He's all over the place writing and researching our stuff. Just a little bit of credentials and background. I'll just maybe do it for both of us. My first legislative session was 1995. That's a long time ago. I actually worked with Bill Glahn in about 2005, I want to say, or 2006 at the Department of Commerce. 2006, where Bill was the deputy commissioner for energy in the Plenty administration. I was also working there. And then since then, we both worked in the House and the Senate, many legislative sessions. So hopefully we'll bring some experience and some analysis that'll help explain what happened. A little bit on the format. We're going to go through kind of a list of issues in no particular order. We're going to riff. We're going to talk about everything that happened. We think a lot what happened. We'll probably talk for a half an hour, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. So if you have a question, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Click on that and put your question in there. Maybe we'll answer it before if you listen to the whole program. But if not, we'd love to do a lot of Q&A. We have an hour slotted. It's noon. We go to 1, but we'll keep talking if people stay on. If we want to go further than 1 o'clock, we certainly don't have to stop at 1 if there's a lot of interest still and there's a lot of questions. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Bill to get us started. What happened at the Minnesota Legislature 2023?
Well, let's back up a little bit to 2022. So we had an election last year where all the 201 legislators were on the ballot. The governor was on the ballot. November 2022, we had an election. One of the issues during that election was the budget surplus. It was more than a $10 billion budget surplus, and the then Republican Senate could not come to an agreement with the Democratic governor, and the money sat on the books until the election happened. And everybody wants to know what happened to the $18 billion surplus. $18 billion state government surplus. The debate last year on the election campaign was, should we give it back to taxpayers or should we spend it on more government programs, new government spending? So the verdict was it was all spent. The 18 billion is gone.
It's gone.
It's gone. Not a penny of that 18 billion is going to make it back to a taxpayer in Minnesota. So the Democrats won the election. They control the governorship. They control the Minnesota Senate by a single seat, 34-33. They control the Minnesota House 70-64, and they decided to spend all the money. So the 18 billion is gone, never coming back. And on top of that, they raised taxes by $9 billion. So taxes are going up $9 billion. They spent the surplus, and that's over the next 4 years. Over the next 4 years, $9 billion in new taxes on top of the 50-some billion that we were already paying.
And that's a good number to know, because there's been a lot of numbers floating around. You know, the tax bill was $3 billion. Well, that's the dollar amount assigned to that bill, but a lot of that was spending. Some of it was tax increases. The rebates are in there, but you're adding up the $9 billion is everything. So it's paid family leave. It's all these different things.
So in fact, most of the $9 billion is not in the quote tax bill. Mm-hmm. It's in other bills. So you heard we have the largest tax cut in history. There is no tax cut. So first of all, that's a misnomer. Most of what the Democrats are claiming as a tax cut is in fact just wealth redistribution. They're taking money from taxpayers and giving it to people who didn't necessarily pay any taxes through rebates or credits or the famous $260 checks. So the $2-3 billion are claiming tax cuts. There are some Social Security beneficiaries are not having to pay taxes, state taxes, who did pay some state taxes. So there are a few taxpayers who are a little better off. Mm-hmm. The Social Security recipients, a few of them now are exempt who weren't exempt before. But the bulk of the money they count as tax cuts is just credits and rebates to people who are low income. So for example, the $260 check started out as a $2,000 check.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember Walsh saying $2,000 checks.
When he was running for re-election, he said, if you re-elect me, I will get you $2,000 rebates through the tax.
I already had a plan to spend that.
Well, you didn't get it. We didn't get the $1,000. He later negotiated himself down to $1,000, and they ended up with $260. But Bill, you're not going
I'm gonna get that, right?
No, you're not going to get
260.
that. No, you're not going to get it.
Right.
I'm not going to get it either.
Mm.
So it's based on your 2021 income, and if you had single income of 75,000, household income of 150,000, if you were above that, you get nothing. If you're below that, maybe you get the $260. But they're making it somewhat complicated to collect. But anyway, that's the bottom line effort.
So where did the surplus go? What on the spending side then?
Well, we have a graph that kind of shows the growth of spending. So I don't know if it will pop up on the chart. So we have a graph that shows over the last 10 years or so. This is the 2-year budget that the state government passes in odd number years. There it is. So every 2 years, the state government passes a 2-year budget. This is the quote general fund budgets, what everybody talks about when they talk about the state budget. The number has doubled in 10 years. So 10 years ago, state government spent every 2 years, $35 billion with a B. This last budget is now just passed earlier this week, is now over $70 billion. So more than 70 billion, 72, 73, there are different numbers floating out there, going to all kinds of programs. And that is a exponential jump from work. You see the graph going up in a linear function. You know, population hasn't changed in 10 years. Inflation has gone up a lot in the last couple of years, but not really much over the last decade. But you can see spending has popped up. So they spent the $18 billion surplus. They're spending over the next 4 years another $9 billion in increased taxes, netted out 2 or 3 billion that they're returning to people in terms of credits and
The redistribution.
of wealth.
Yeah.
It's a welfare program.
And then next slide is exactly where it went, or
right.
roughly
So
where it went.
a little idea. People think, oh, we spend money on all kinds of things in state government. We really only spend money on 2 things: health and human services, which is essentially welfare, and the K through 12 budget, which is public education. So you add those 2 categories together, you can see from the chart, it's 2/3, 70% of the entire budget goes to 2 items: welfare payments, transfer payments to people who are low income, and the money that gets spent from the state on public schools.
Yeah, and a lot of this money, we did an analysis earlier in the session on how do you grow government this much? Well, government is people, and the massive growth in public employees. We've got a room full of interns, eating pizza and going through the budget right now, trying to figure out exactly how many new employees are going to be employed by the state of Minnesota because of this budget. It's going to be thousands of new employees. There's new whole bureaucracies created. The paid family leave bill creates a bureaucracy with about 400 new employees to administer this thing.
All right, let me interrupt you, Bill.
Okay.
So you and I both work for the Department of Commerce.
Yes.
How many employees did the Department of Commerce have?
I don't remember, probably 300-400, I think.
So we were creating a cabinet level
Yeah.
agency as big as the Department of Commerce, which covered every industry, banking.
Yeah, that was insurance and real estate
energy.
regulation, plus the energy stuff.
We covered 6 or 8 whole industries were regulated by the Department of Commerce for 300 employees. And now they're creating for this one insurance program to give you 20 weeks of paid leave.
Yeah.
We're going to create a bureaucracy as big as that.
Yep, 400. So if you're looking for a government job, now's the time to get in line. The marijuana law creates another bureaucracy, the Office of Cannabis Management, which, by the way, they passed the law and they already have a website up. Really efficient government going on right now. And that's got a couple hundred employees for that. Walsh creates a new Department of Children, Families, and Happy Thoughts, as Joe Souchere would call it. We had one of those in the 90s when Governor Tim Pawlenty was elected in 2002. He got rid of that and said, we need a Department of Education that deals with that, and Human Services can deal with everything else. Governor Walsh is bringing back the Department of Children, Family, and Happy Thoughts. That's got many, many new employees. Every single agency, including the governor's office, is touched with new employees. We'll have a lot of detail on that soon, just kind of quantifying all of that. But government is people, and we're hiring a lot more people. One other thing on the difference, like when you and I worked at the Department of Commerce a long time ago, there's a new level of employee or new type of employee in state government right now: diversity, equity, and inclusion employees. And you would think, oh, each agency maybe has a DEI coordinator or somebody that kind of looks out for that at the department. No, it's not just one person. There are whole departments in the state agencies dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they have meetings, where they all get together from all the different agencies. And honestly, I don't know what they do. I mean, they're not teaching a class. They're not administering a program in welfare and helping somebody with a payment. They're not, monitoring insurance and make sure there's no fraud like we did at Commerce. It's diversity, equity, inclusion, whole departments of them, hundreds of employees throughout state government. So that's where your money is going when they say we spent the $18 billion surplus.
Right. So it's just like every state university has its DEI department or whatever euphemism they use to call it. But this is what they say when Democrats say they passed a state budget through an equity lens. That's what they're talking about. So it's Democrats gone wild. It's the bureaucratic Full Employment Act of 2023. I want to drill down a little bit into the taxes.
Yes.
So I mentioned the $9 billion figure of tax increases over the next 4 years. And we mentioned that actually very little of that is in the quote tax bill. So the biggest increase in state government taxes is the transportation bill. The transportation bill, which is supposed to, roads and bridges, that sort of thing. They're raising the gas tax. They are indexing the gas tax to inflation. They picked as an inflation index, the highest inflation index they could possibly find.
So it's not CPI.
It's like 20-25% a year.
Yeah.
So the gas tax is going to shoot up. We're kind of the middle of the road for gas taxes in Minnesota. We're going to quickly become one of the highest ones in America.
That's all right, because gas prices aren't that high and crippling right now anyway, right?
Right. So
we can handle it.
So, and I know your personal favorite is the tab fee.
Yep.
So to get your license tab renewed, they are increasing the tax, and we covered this for the last few months. They're basing the tax not on the value of your car, how much your car is worth, but 160% of the value of your car.
That sounds fair.
So we're taxing you not on 100% of the value of your car, but 160% of the value of the car, because they didn't want to raise the rate, the percent amount. So they just artificially pumped up how much your car is worth by 60% and charge you on that. So that's and there's also the 50% delivery fee.
Yep.
So if you get a
50
delivery,
cent.
50 cent, sorry,
Yep.
50 cent.
Don't make it worse than it is.
Yeah, it's already bad
50
enough.
cents on every delivery.
Every delivery you get with more than $100, I think maybe food.
That's not food and clothing.
But
I don't know how Amazon is going to figure all this out. I mean, Minnesota's going to call Amazon and say, hey, we got a new structure you have to deal with. Don't tax anybody on things over 100, or hit them with a fee, 50 cents, over 100, no food, no clothing. What a nightmare, but
well,
that's
what
what
if you
we're
have
doing.
some food mixed in with your?
Yeah, I don't even know how they do that.
Well, they got computers.
They'll
They'll
figure
figure
it
it out. So that's 3.7 billion is in the quote transportation bill of new taxes. Then we have a
Sales tax.
Before we get to that, I don't want to give you the impression that $3.7 billion is going to fix roads and bridges. It's all going to transit.
Yeah. Well, you're pointing at me for my transit rant.
Yeah. This is, according to our script, this is the interval in which Bill Walsh does his transit rant.
This is just stubbornness, folks. This is just stubbornness on the part of the Democrats in the legislature. Transit ridership is tanking from the pandemic. People are changing the way that we go to work. Crime is rampant in transit, especially in Minnesota. We had a report out recently from American Experiment on the rise in crime and how high our transit crime is compared to other cities with similar transit systems. And yet, look at North Star, it's dead. Southwest Light Rail is the biggest boondoggle. We gave it the Lifetime Golden Turkey Achievement Award for being the hugest boondoggle in the history of the state. And yet Democrats are saying we're going to raise sales taxes in the metro area to go to more transit. They're steering the money in law to more transit. It's just a stubbornness to continue down this path when all other indications tell you stop doing transit, stop doing trains, stop doing bus rapid transit, things like that. So that's a rant number one. Why are they so stubborn?
Keep doing the same thing again and again and again, expecting different results.
Yeah.
But,
we just to go back to the taxes again. Center of the American Experiment has a quarterly magazine called Thinking Minnesota. In that, we do a poll. We do a poll every quarter. We forgot to plug our poll. So we have some polling we did during the session on some of these taxes. They're wildly unpopular. We published that. We sent it to the governor. He must not have got it. The delivery fee for packages, 72% of Minnesotans oppose that. Car tab increases, 81% of Minnesotans oppose that. Raising the sales tax in the metro area to go to transit, 57% oppose that. You get numbers like 81% opposing something that's universally unpopular. And yet they just stubbornly did these taxes. They're in law. They're not listening to you at all. Which brings us to we forgot to tease our poll that we were in the field this week, just as session ended, We were in the field with our next poll, and we got some very interesting results to share towards the end of the call. But it's essentially, maybe you can do better than I can on the.
Well, again, we polled Sunday through Tuesday, so a bunch of these interviews occurred after session gavelled out. So we're getting the full, we've had 5 months of Democrats passing their entire agenda. I think the majority leader for the Democrats said they went 30 for 30. They had 30 priorities, and all 30 are now passed in the law signed by the governor. So they got everything they wanted. And so we went into the field, our nationally recognized pollster, representative sample of Minnesota voters, and asked them the right track, wrong track question. And our pollster found, for the first time in Governor Walz's administration, 5 years in office, we polled this question 4 times, a majority, 51%, say Minnesota's on the wrong track.
So everything we're talking about here, this whole selfie session, the celebrations, the marching band this week, they're very much patting themselves on the back. The people of Minnesota are saying, we're not with it. Wrong track.
There's been nothing but positive media coverage of this for 6 months. Since the Democrats won their, quote, trifecta, there has been, acres and acres of newsprint published about how great this agenda is and how popular it is. And this is the first poll I think I've seen anybody has done on, well, what do voters think about what's going on? How do voters think that this session has played out? They're hearing great things about it from media, but 51% say we're on the wrong track, the highest number we've ever gotten in this poll.
That's remarkable and newsworthy. That's breaking news you got on this call. So the benefit of being on this call.
No one else will even ask the question. Well, back to the taxes.
Yeah, we got to go faster. We're at 17 minutes.
All right, so we got a lot to cover. Again, there were 75 bills passed in this session. Some of them go to hundreds, if not thousands of pages. So we're not going to be able to cover everything this afternoon, but we're trying to hit some of the highlights. And back to the $9 billion in taxes, we have $3.7 billion out of the transportation bill going to transit. We have in the housing bill, there's $400 million, and that is represented by a new sales tax for, I think it's just the metro area, a new sales tax to pay for housing programs and homelessness programs, a new sales tax. And again, they kept talking during the campaign last year and all during session about making the rich pay their fair share. There's very little in these tax increases geared toward the rich. This is all middle class, working class people. Everything you buy other than food and clothing that has a sales tax is going to be higher now. The metro area and the city of Minneapolis are going to have some of the highest sales taxes in America as a result of what happened in this session in 2023. New sales tax to support housing and homelessness programs. You mentioned the paid family leave, which provides up to 20 weeks of paid leave every year for people who are new parents, maternity, paternity leave, caring for a sick relative, whatever reason you have, 20 weeks of paid leave per year, paid for by a new tax, new payroll tax. So everybody who's watching this, your take-home pay just went down. There's going to be a new payroll tax taken out of your check to pay for this benefit, which you may or may not qualify for at any point. $2 billion, you mentioned the 300 employees who they're going to hire to administer this. And because it's 300 employees and a brand new program never offered before, and they didn't take our suggestion of doing a private sector solution, hiring an insurance company to provide this benefit, or having it be provided through your private employer. New bureaucracy, state governments get into the insurance business.
It's going to be fine. They did MinLars without a MinSure. They have a great track record of building computer systems from scratch and administering new programs, don't we?
They're giving themselves 2.5 years to get this done. So they built in a lag time. So this won't even take effect until 2026.
Yeah.
So the taxes are going to take effect before then, but the benefits aren't going to be available for 2.5 years because they got to build a whole new bureaucracy, a whole new computer system.
All right, enough budget, enough taxes. Let's move on to issues.
Public safety, 550 pages in the public safety bill, but there's nothing to protect the public in the public safety bill. There's amazing leniency. Oh, you were talking about our polling, about how in the last election and our polling that showed that crime, concerns about crime are among the highest concerns voters have.
Yep.
Democrats have done nothing to address that. In fact, we just did a poll that reinforced all that. So concerns about crime are now baked into the electorate. But Democrats, rather than addressing crime, focused on criminals. So they're reducing sentences, the amount of time you would actually spend in jail. So before, if you got sentenced to say 12 years in prison, the presumption was you would only spend 8 behind bars and the rest of it would be on probation. So now they've reduced that to half. So if you get a 12-year sentence, you're presumed to only spend 6 years in prison. And the idea is they just passed in another bill provision that felons can vote. So far, if you're in prison, you can't vote. But once you get out of prison, you can vote. And so now they are increasing the number of potential voters out there for the next election in 2024 by having felons vote and in decreasing the number of people behind bars to increase the electorate.
Yeah, let's talk about voting. We can segue from crime to voting here because we're dastardly over time. They passed an elections bill. They call it democracy for the people. They try to trump up fear of January 6th. This is just a horrible thing, and our voting is in jeopardy. They use that to pass a new elections bill. It's been noted a lot. I mean, people don't care about process and how things happen, but it's true. In the past, elections bills that influence how we vote, have been bipartisan. They've had Democrat support, Republican support equally. They've been ironed out, and governors haven't signed bills. So we threw that out the window, of course, this year. There's been no bipartisanship. So the election bill they passed was completely all Democrats voting for it, Republicans voting against it. There's a bunch of stuff in there. The thing that I think the most important thing, felon voting is a big part of it, is the automatic absentee ballot situation. Right now, if you want to vote absentee, you when the election starts, you go online, you request an absentee ballot application, you fill it out, you request an absentee ballot, you vote absentee. They're trying to automate that. We want to make that even easier. So if you did that this year, they're going to just automatically send you an absentee ballot next year. Not an application. They're just going to assume that because you asked for a ballot to vote absentee one year, that you want it next year. And it's going to be a permanent list that you can get on, and they're just going to send out absentee ballots to people who are on this list. The opportunities for fraud in the absentee ballot world are going to get bigger and worse. And that's been a concern of a lot of people, where the fraud in elections is going to be in the absentee situation. And they made it much worse with this absentee list that they're just going to administer and send out automatically. You may want to vote 1 year absentee because you're going to be out of the precinct on election day. But you may want to go back to the poll the next year. Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to be on the list. You're going to get that stuff. And they'll make that list available to parties. And parties got to, my advice to my Republican Party friends would be, learn how to administer this, learn how to adapt to this, because the Democrats are good at this, and they're gonna beat you if you don't to figure it out. But that's probably the worst thing they did. They also have 16 and 17-year-olds can now pre-register to vote. I mean, pre-registration, I don't know what the value of that is. I mean, if you're 18 or you're going to be 18 before an election, you can now pre-register. If you're a high school senior and you're going to be 18 in November, you can pre-register when you're 17 and be ready when you're 18. But moving that back to 16, it's just putting people on lists that could vote if mistakes are made in the system. We're just asking for trouble, asking for fraud. Oh no, it'll all be double checked against the voter roll. No 16-year-olds will be able to vote. No illegal immigrants who now have driver's licenses will be able to vote. That's a different list. We'll make sure. Well, there's going to be some trust issues there and some opportunities for fraud.
Well, people have forgotten about this because it happened a couple of months ago. So much has happened in the last few days of session. But a couple of months ago, the legislature passed, governor signed a bill to extend driver's licenses to illegal immigrants in Minnesota. And one of the things that I wrote about was the concern that when you register your driver's license, when you get your driver's license, you can be automatically registered to vote. And that was part of the 16 and 17-year-olds. When they get their driver's license the first time, they will be registered to vote, even though legally they're supposed to wait a couple of years before they actually cast a ballot. But the concern was when we give illegal aliens driver's licenses, they'll automatically be registered to vote and receive the absentee ballots in the mail. And is there going to be a system to make sure that doesn't happen? So that's going on with this.
Yeah, MNLARS, MNsurance, it'll be fine.
And so because we're in the public safety bill still, I wanted to talk about the divisive social issues.
Good, let's transition.
Because there are some of them that were located, bizarrely enough, in the public safety bill. So somehow in this 550-page bill, we added a new category to the State Human Rights Act. So the State Human Rights Act, our Civil Rights Act, prohibits discrimination against people based on their race, their color, their creed, their age, their sex, national origin, all these categories that people say you shouldn't be able to discriminate based on who somebody is, how they were born, and where they came from. So we have a well-established, decades-old civil rights bill. 30 years ago, we added the category of sexual orientation to the state's Human Rights Act, civil rights protections for people who have different sexual orientations. They made a little tweak as part of adding gender identity as yet another protected category. So we add another protected category, hasn't gotten a lot of publicity. Apparently there wasn't much pushback on adding trans people, people with different gender identities, all those pronouns we keep talking about. They are now protected under state human rights law from discrimination in housing, employment, government services, all manner of things. But when they did that, they changed the definition of sexual orientation. 30 years ago, we wrote the definition of sexual orientation to explicitly exclude pedophiles,
right?
Adults who are sexually attracted to children. We want to make clear they don't have any rights under state law. They have no protections under our Human Rights Act. But in adding gender identity as another category, they took that out. I called it a pro-pedophilia bit of a legislation. It didn't legalize pedophilia. It didn't legalize child sexual abuse, but it is now making pedophiles eligible for civil rights protections. Now it would be up to a judge somewhere or the Department of Human Rights to add that as a new category. And who knows, maybe that won't happen. Lawyers differ on whether judges.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion among lawyers. I mean, a lot of lawyers are saying, look, when the judge looks at a statute, they look at what the legislature intended, what the legislative intent was, and if there's a change in that, if the legislature changes a statute, the judge has to assume that has meaning. There's a reason they did that. So if something is removed from statute, you can't say it doesn't mean anything. The judge has to assume it means something. Of course he will, because they'll say, well, but it was there and now it's not there. How am I to interpret that? So that is really open for judicial interpretation. And like you say, hopefully we will never have to worry about that.
Well, we hope not, but hope is not a great strategy.
Yep.
So there was another provision added under the divisive social issues. Minnesota is now a trans refuge state. So a lot of other states around the country had outlawed the practice of, for minors, people under the age of 18, the sexual reassignment surgery, however you want it, the gender affirming care, whether that includes surgery or whether that includes irreversible hormone treatments. A lot of states have just outlawed that. Well, that was always legal here. It's still legal here. But we wrote into state law protections for children who come here, however they come here, accompanied, unaccompanied. They are now eligible for that permanent gender assignment surgery or hormone treatment. And just like sanctuary state for illegal immigrants, we're now a sanctuary state for trans care. And I want to
So you're looking at it wrong. This is the new tourism for Minnesota. Right. You've got to be positive here. I mean, we used to have tourism on our lakes, our rivers, our streams, come fish, come go to the North Shore. Now the tourism has flipped a little bit. Bring your children, I guess, is the new tourism, or abortion is going to be the new tourism as well. So
before we get to abortion, I did want to give out an award here, our legislator of the year, and hopefully we'll get the legislator's picture up. It's a Representative Lee Finke, who represents a part of St. Paul near where the state fair is located. So it's that northern part of St. Paul and the adjacent suburbs of Lauderdale and Falcon Heights and Roseville.
Como. Yep.
The legislator actually lives in St. Paul, but this person was named USA Today's Woman of the Year. So it won't be the first award Representative Finke has received during this session. Just elected for the first time in November, but Representative Finke was the driving force behind the trans refuge state legislation, adding gender identity as a new protected category under state civil rights law, and also removing the anti-pedophilia provision from existing state law that had been on the books for 30 years. So whether you like those provisions or not, they're certainly were driven by Representative Finke, an incredibly productive first year in the legislature. Representative Finke had less to do with the abortion, but that's how we started and ended this session.
Yep.
A big issue in last year's campaign after the Roe versus Wade reversal at the US Supreme Court was what direction abortion policy would go in Minnesota. And what the Democrats ran on was protecting abortion, reproductive rights. I forget the euphemism for that, but they removed from the books all restrictions on the state, in the state on abortion. You say we now have the same abortion laws as North Korea,
Yep.
which is not. So it's
Yep.
perfectly legal. So we, in the very first bill passed in this session, removed restrictions on time limits. So you can have abortion up till birth. All 9 months of gestation are eligible for abortion, reproductive health care. And this last bill we passed right before they gavelled out on Monday repealed the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So Minnesota removed from statute protections that had been on the books for many years to, if an infant somehow survived an abortion attempt, that they would have been eligible for life-preserving care. That's now out the window. So we have abortion up until birth and beyond.
So we went way beyond codifying Roe versus Wade.
Right.
You heard that in the campaign. We need to codify Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is looking conservative compared to what we have in Minnesota right now. No restrictions.
And a lot of states did that. They locked into a law something with a 10-week, 12-week, 15-week.
Mhm.
We locked in 9 months plus.
All right, we're doing better on time. I'm at, let's see, 33, so we have 7 minutes. Let's talk about the bonding bill. Bonding bill broke at the end, the $2.6 billion bonding bill, borrowing, essentially putting money on the state credit card. First thing I want to say about the bonding bill, I love the media. The media calls it a critical infrastructure bill. Of course, the Democrats name it that, and the media picks it up. Critical infrastructure. What does that sound like? That sounds like roads or dams or water, utility, which there's a lot of that in the bill. But there's also a lot of hockey rinks in the bonding bill this year. There are theaters.
Don't tell me there's a ski
There's a
chalet.
ski chalet at Spirit Mountain. We gave a Golden Turkey Award to Spirit Mountain, to the city of Duluth for funneling money to Spirit Mountain to prop it up. We continue to do that. $14 million we just gave Spirit Mountain in Duluth. You ought to get a free pass, Minnesota taxpayers, to ski there because it's outrageous. There are bike paths, there are theaters, there are pools. It is pork. This bill is full of pork. It's not critical infrastructure. I should say it's way beyond critical infrastructure. But then the bonding bill part 2, they got creative. Okay, Democrats very creative. They're trying to figure out how to get money to nonprofits. They love nonprofits. I believe you've done a ton of work recently on the abuse of nonprofits. The Feeding Our Future scandal was all about nonprofits popping up fast overnight with no track record, no financial accountability, and getting state and federal grants and misusing them, stealing them, everything that went bad. We're going to double down on that. We have millions of dollars in the bonding bill.
Of millions.
It's a lot, and grants to nonprofits. Now, when I first saw that, they can't bond for something that isn't a state entity or a city or a government entity. Well, it's cash. They're just giving these as grants, as cash. And again, we've got like I said, the next room full of interns getting pizza and going through this list of nonprofits to find political connections, to find how old they are, if they popped up overnight. Tracking this money is going to be a lot of work, but we're going to do that over the next weeks and months. But again, tons of pork, rewarding their friends, rewarding political friends, the whole bit. So that's the bonding bill, $2.6 billion, biggest bonding bill ever. Congratulations. The credit card continues to grow.
Yeah, well, we probably don't have time to get into the whole hate speech registry.
Oh, no,
thing.
we got to. It's somebody has a question on it, so it's perfect.
Okay.
And we have 5 minutes, so let's do that, and then we'll do our lightning round.
Okay. So in the public safety bill, back to the public safety bill, 550 pages, and there was a lot of talk about this during the session. We already track hate crimes in Minnesota. If you commit a hate crime, there is a list of all the hate crimes committed in the state, and the Department of Human Rights, again, tracks hate crimes. There aren't enough hate crimes to meet demand. There's more demand for hate crimes in Minnesota than the haters can supply. So they've created this new hate speech registry. So it's called bias incidents. They don't define incident, they don't define bias, but I am sure that our 45 minutes here so far is going to put us on this new registry.
I would be extremely disappointed if it didn't. And if it doesn't, we have to up our game. because it's going to be my mission as the director of communications at American Experiment to be on this registry weekly. I mean, they're going to just have to put a special team just on us, because we will offend people, and we will say the truth, which will probably end up on this incident.
Well, state government has appropriated $1 million to the Department of Human Rights to create a report every 2 years. And this report is taking the temperature of hate in Minnesota, reporting on the status of hate in Minnesota. And in doing that, they're supposed to keep a log, a registry of all the incidents that get reported to them of whenever somebody, it's the microaggressions, whenever somebody feels like they've been disrespected, offended, somebody said something they didn't like, they'll report. There's no due process. You, Bill Walsh, will be on this list. I will be on this list. We won't know that we're on the list, but until we try to go apply for a loan or something and don't get it. So we don't know what the list is going to be used for, other than this report, this $1 million report they're going to produce every 2 years. But it probably isn't constitutional, but good luck in getting a court in Minnesota to rule against it.
Yeah. All right, we have a few minutes left in our time. We'll go to questions. We have quite a few questions popping up. We've got pages of them.
Lightning round.
Lightning round. Just some other things that you need to know about that happened. We don't have time to get into a big detail. First one for me was the state office building. We spent $320 million a few years ago to redo the Capitol. It's beautiful. We've completely reconstructed it. Now the state office building where the House of Representatives lives, they're going to redo their building. It's going to cost $500 million. So even more than the Capitol itself, they're going to spend $500 million over the next few years to redo that building. It's actually started in an earlier session, but it continues today. That's my first lightning round one.
Well, it's like the cost of a twin stadium. So we could build a brand new baseball stadium.
Legislators need better offices.
They're going to build offices for bureaucrats.
Well, ironically, we're taking too long on the lightning round. One of the reasons for the reconstruction of that building is safety. So they're very concerned about safety in St. Paul at the Capitol, and they have a right to be. So instead of doing anything like we talked about earlier to improve safety for the lives of Minnesotans, they're just going to build a fort that they can stay in to keep the That's right. So they're going to have a safe place they can go to work in St. Paul. Forget the rest of us trying to live our lives and go to White Castle down the street and get a hamburger.
So of course these are just non sequiturs.
Yes.
This has nothing to do with anything. Menstrual products in boys' bathrooms. We're going to have tampons in boys' bathrooms in the public schools because reasons.
Finally,
at long last.
Of course, we talked about abortion earlier. They went out of their way to defund crisis pregnancy centers. It just almost gets mean. I mean, these crisis pregnancy centers are nuns, and nurses, retired nurses, trying to help women through pregnancies and trying to make good choices, handing out layettes, and diapers and clothing and trying to help support people who get pregnant. So that we got to defund that. We can't have state government funding that. It's embarrassing. Terrible.
The train to Duluth. So nobody rides the North Star commuter train. The transit's down across the board, but we're going to have a state-funded train to Duluth, which I guess they had some decades ago before they invented cars or something.
Before it died because no one was riding it.
Right. So we're gonna spend many millions of dollars to reinstitute a passenger train.
Yeah, but it leverages federal dollars. Don't you love that word? Leverages federal dollars. A couple $100 million a state leverages lots more federal. So it's going to be all federal money. We might as well spend it. Otherwise, it goes to another state. We can't let these trains go to other states. So that's coming. Roof Depot property turned into an urban farm. So Minneapolis has been fighting with some neighborhood group about the Roof Depot property. The group wants to turn it into an urban farm. So the state of Minnesota solved the problem for them. We're going to help this neighborhood group and help the city of Minneapolis with their dispute. And we're going to kick in millions of dollars to help the city of Minneapolis sell or buy the site. I can't remember who's selling and who's buying. I think Minneapolis owns it now. They wanted to make a maintenance shop out of it, which seems like a smart thing to do for the city. But the neighbors want an urban farm. By the way, it's on a Superfund site. So I don't know why anybody wants to buy produce grown on a Superfund site, but taxpayers across the state now are going to help solve Minneapolis' problem.
Pumpkins the size of buildings. Yeah. So again, we have a group of Democrats fighting with another group of Democrats in the city of Minneapolis over to what to do with this little plot of land. So the Democrats in St. Paul are going to make the people in Warroad and Cottonwood County and Austin, Minnesota, pay for this urban farm on a Superfund site to grow cucumbers the size of utility sheds. So that's what's going on with the urban farm. They want to kick Uber and Lyft out of Minnesota. Now, this hasn't been decided yet. So this may or may not happen.
Well, I mean, they passed the bill.
They passed the
that
bill, but
essentially
the governor is sitting on it. He hasn't decided whether to sign it, but essentially it regulates Uber and Lyft, the car shares, the car.
Yeah,
share
the
services.
worldwide company, they said, we're going to go into your system, and when you're in Minnesota drivers, you're going to pay them this much per ride, and you're going to give them this benefit. We're just going to micromanage your business model in our state. And you think the company's just going to say, okay, great, sounds good, we'll do that. They may cancel. They may just say, we're not going to play in Minnesota. Or if they do stay, your rates are going to be double every other state. So thanks a lot. Need a ride to the airport to leave this state. Can't get an Uber because they killed that too. Last one, we're giving away a park to the tribes. This is the beginning of a trend I think we're going to see, where, you heard a lot about land acknowledgements, and, we're sitting on a land that was once the Dakota people. We're taking it to the next step. We are giving away, it's in the legislation this year, a state park to the tribe. I don't have the details on it. We can go into the details on which tribe and everything, but it's the beginning of a trend I think we're going to see in a land grab by Native American tribes based on this concept that we're living on their land.
And give it back, every acre, give it back now.
Yeah,
that's what should be our policy. So, but before you get to the questions,
yep.
So we've only given you a taste. We didn't even get into education.
We didn't do education, and we didn't do marijuana.
Skipped entire categories. Illegal aliens are going to get free health insurance. There's all kinds of outrages in this bill, or in these bills. There's 75 of them that were passed. But before we get to the questions, we polled, well, what do you think of this session? So once the session was over, we went out and asked 500 voters, a representative sample of Minnesota voters, what they thought of this session. And what were the results, Bill?
Oh, sorry, I was looking at questions and not listening. The results of the poll, which question?
So 37% thought it was excellent or good, and more than half, 58%, is that the right number? 58% said it was only fair or poor.
And that I honestly think that's shocking, because the press coverage of what was going on in St. Paul, I call it the selfie session. You've got all these videos of the legislators being carried off the floor, the shoulders.
Footage.
You've got
drones over.
You've got celebrations and people singing, and so nothing but good coverage and press out of this huge agenda. And we go out and poll people like, yeah, not so much. No, I think the legislature
fair to
do a very good job.
38% said it was excellent or good. So we've heard nothing but positive reports about what the Democrats have been up to. The voters aren't buying it. The voters have seen it for what it is.
All right, so there's a ton of questions. Let me just see if I can give you a good one. The child tax credit, income limit of $35,000. This is that $1,750 payment. Democrats are saying it's going to bring kids out of poverty, but the $35,000 already exceeds the federal poverty guidelines for 2 persons in a 4-person family. So this idea that they're gonna solve poverty by giving people money, redistributing wealth. I mean, in the short term, yes, those families will not be in poverty because we're going to give them money. But what is it? That's not a long-term solution to poverty. Long-term solution to poverty is education, a better job, a career path that gets you on your own for now. So the poverty, out of poverty only lasts as long as the subsidy is there, keeping you out of poverty. Plus it disincentivizes good things and incentivizes bad behavior. So this question of out of poverty is, I think,
poor is defined as anybody under $80,000. So free college tuition for any household under 80,000, which will be all of them before we're done. But you mentioned the education. Just want to touch on that very quickly. We have all these new ethnic studies requirements, all these new mandates. They spent another $2.3 billion on education, the most money we've ever spent on the category of education. Somehow with the $18 billion surplus, still not fully funded. But I just want to point out, what are the results? We have the kids in the city of Minneapolis, only 33% are proficient in reading. So 2/3 of our school kids in Minneapolis can't read. And we spend more money per pupil on not educating the kids in Minneapolis than anywhere in the state, and one of the most expensive cities in America for these results.
Yeah, and the school districts and school board superintendents are not happy with the way the session went. They're usually very happy with Democrats. They love money on the formula, that's great, but all that money is just going to go to teacher settlements. And what they've got was a lot of mandates. The ethnic studies mandate is worth talking about for a second. Ethnic studies, there was a small victory in that they didn't make it a graduation requirement, an ethnic studies course, but they did make it a requirement that every school has to offer an ethnic studies class. That's bad enough. what they've really done is embedded ethnic studies throughout the entire K-12 curriculum, not just social studies, math, reading, everything has to have an ethnic studies tilt to it. You have to hire an employee to work on that at your school district. So there's going to be one new employee hired at the local district. It's an unfunded mandate. And it's going to be embedded throughout the curriculum. The amount of work that's going to be, just forget whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree that ethnic studies is a good idea. And by the way, when we say ethnic studies, it's not the study of other cultures like, oh, we want to study the origins of it's divisive
in Poland.
No, it's divisive content that divides people by race, by what they look like. It's not the ethnic studies. When you say that, it sounds good, but it's not what it's the bait and switch, as we called it. So that's going to be extremely expensive for districts. Let me just talk one more minute about Minneapolis. Minneapolis School District was a big loser in this session. And, they went on strike a year ago. They held out. They got a contract. The superintendent signed the contract and resigned. He dropped the pen and resigned because he knew the contract that he signed with his teachers union was unsustainable. They're relying on money from the pandemic from the federal government still to the tune of $100 million. While the legislature, while Governor Walz is having a selfie, bill signing ceremony, applauding all the great things they're doing, Minneapolis School Board this week's having a meeting with their finance people. They're going to be in statutory operating debt next year. They're not going to be able to make their budget. The state's going to say, hey, you got to come up with a plan to get out of debt or we're not going to give you money. It's dire. And Minneapolis, the money on the formula doesn't even come close to solving their problem. So Minneapolis is a disaster waiting to happen. I'll just make a prediction for next year. Next session, the Democrats are going to come back and the top of the agenda is going to be Save Minneapolis School District. And people all over the state in White Bear Lake and everywhere else that did their school boards right are going to have to send money to Minneapolis again.
Because the Minnesota state government, when they give money to K through 12 education, they give money on a per pupil basis.
Yeah.
And Minneapolis has fewer pupils every year than they had the year before. So the school district in Minneapolis is shrinking in terms of the number of students. They're facing school closures, and they signed a massive contract, giving the teachers a huge raise, which even with this massive, unprecedented, never funded at this level before, they're not even coming close to breaking even.
All right, question from Tom. I like this question. What of those 30 items that can be recalled or terminated if Republicans gain the majority?
All of them.
Well, they all can be repealed, but it's going to be difficult. A couple of things. One, first step would be looking at the electoral map. You have to. The next election is next year. It's just the House.
Good point.
Just the House is up for re-election. So if the House flips to Republican next year, there'll still be Democrat Senate, Democrat governor, Republican House. So you'll be back to kind of gridlock. At least you can stop the bad behavior. And then you would require another election with a Republican Senate and a Republican governor, or a conservative Senate and conservative governor to really undo. These things can be undone, but you're gonna have to make the case. And it just to set it up, to be pessimistic, not optimistic. It's hard to take things away from people. When you give something to somebody in the public, they have a benefit, they have something. To take that away is difficult. It's difficult to sell to them. They're going to take something away that you had. And that's the position that the Republicans would be in if they were to take the majority again. So
we have a principle. Question. Well, when you're looking at the question, there's a principle, one parliament can't bind the next. Mm-hmm. So no matter what the Democrats did in 2023, none of that is binding on a future legislature or a future governor. So everything they put in place now can be reversed somewhere downrange.
Another good question I like, and I don't think we have the answer, but it's good to talk about. Can you talk about the all funds budget? That's a question from Sarah. All funds is just conceptually, what does that mean?
When we talk about the $72 billion, we're talking about, quote, the general fund. And then again, this is deep in the weeds on state budgeting. There's a lot of hide the ball in the state budget process. So when we talk about $72 billion, not a penny of that goes for transportation. Transportation is its own category. It has the gas tax and the license tab fees and all the other taxes with the car sales that go along with that. That funds transit, it funds roads, it funds bridges. That's in another category. The all funds includes not just the general fund, but the gas tax and all these dedicated taxes and fees, plus all the money we get from the federal government, which is massive. Mm-hmm. So we talk about how big state government is, you have no clue. Because a lot of the money that comes outside of when you write a check to the Department of Revenue to pay your taxes, or you get money deducted from your check, or you go and buy something at Target that gets a sales tax associated with it. There's money that comes from the feds that goes on top of that, that gets spent, and a lot of our Health and Human Services budget comes from federal spending. A lot of the transportation budget comes from federal spending. So that's the all funds budget. And there's a couple of times bigger than the budget we're talking about.
Much bigger than the 72 billion.
It's a large enterprise in St. Paul, and they spend freely no matter where the money comes from.
Okay, here's a question from Tom. What positive can you think of that would keep a Minnesotan from moving to Florida? So that gets to, I don't know if I'm gonna answer that question, but was there any good that happened at the session? So I've got one. I got one thing that I think that was good that happened in this legislative session, and that is the reading legislation, the literacy initiative in the education bill. They actually are moving to the science of reading. They're actually going to teach kids how to read using the right methodology. And this got political, as many things do. And so liberals wanted to teach them a certain way, and conservatives want to teach another way. And this is a bizarre thing, but it took a liberal reporter to do a really good story on National Public Radio, actually, to kind of expose the flaws in reading and how we're teaching kids to read across the country, to get liberals to start saying, maybe we should really return to phonics and a science of reading approach. So legislation passed. Minnesota is back on the road to teaching reading the right way. The one thing that needs to get done next year, if we could, or the one thing they missed, is the teacher colleges. So while we're telling districts, return to the science of reading, use the science of reading, here's some money to train your teachers in the science of reading, the teacher colleges in Minnesota are going to still kick out teachers that aren't learning that because they're stuck where they are on how we read. So we got to fix that, but very good news on the reading front.
All right, my answer to that is in the poll results that you gave earlier in the hour. So we had the Democrats, their dream session, they went 30 for 30 on their priorities. Everything they wanted and more, they got enacted into statute signed by the governor. They had 100% positive media coverage for the last 6 months on every item they put forward. And 51% of voters are opposed. It didn't work. They have their agenda, they got it enacted, and more voters said nope than are in favor of it.
And just on the idea of moving to Florida, we had our annual dinner recently, and our message was, stay and fight. We are staying and fighting. We're not going anywhere, and we're going to expose what's been done. We're going to write about it. We're going to research. We're going to arm conservatives with information to take the debate into the community and your family, eventually the legislature. So stay and fight. These things are always cyclical. A year ago in May, we were sitting here thinking, wow, there's going to be a red wave. Biden's numbers are really low. Republicans are going to win all these seats. The conservative agenda is going to move forward. Things change really fast. They will flip back. They're cyclical. And this session is transformational, definitely transformational, but it will flip back and we will cycle.
Yeah, we're going to be here in Golden Valley in front of the ficus. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah. All right, some quick ones. Any change in income tax brackets?
No, that was one thing that they asked for. The fifth bracket, surtax on millionaires, is one of the few items that they had put forward that didn't pass, but they did it a different way. Instead of raising the tax rate on people with more than $1 million in annual income, they took away deductions. So if you are making more than $1 million, your state taxes still went up, but they did it by taking away deductions that every other taxpayer is entitled to, but instead of raising the rate. So the answer is yes and no.
And most of the taxes hit the rest of us. They always say we're going to tax the rich, and they never tax the rich. I mean, they do tax the rich, but they really hit the middle class with gas tax increases, sales tax increases, delivery fees. That hits everybody, completely regressive. They always say we're going to tax the rich. They always tax everybody else. What happened to gaming?
That's to be determined. So as bad as this session was, there's already talk of a special session this summer. So there were 2 or 3 items they didn't quite get to. One of them was what to do about the hospital merger involving the university's hospital. The gaming went down to the last minute, trying to get an agreement between the racetracks and the Native American tribes and other interests in sports gambling. And they didn't come to an agreement, so that got kicked down to maybe a special session this summer.
Okay, this is interesting. Who pays for the surgery for unaccompanied minors who want a sex change? So assuming this is the tourism bill and folks come to Minnesota, I mean, the simple answer is, well, they would have to pay for that. The state is not necessarily setting aside money in this trans refuge bill.
There were 1,000 pages in this bill. We haven't read them all yet.
Well, but contrast that with how easy it is to move to Minnesota and to get on the roll for healthcare in Minnesota. We just allowed illegal aliens to get Minnesota care now, benefits that. So it's very easy to get on a state healthcare plan in Minnesota, easiest in the country. And so conceivably you could get the government to pay for that. But on its face, probably not. It's just the idea you can come and get that great gender affirming care. Okay, let me find another one. Oh, has anybody ever tracked how much is spent on these signing ceremonies, such as when they rented the armory for the driver's license for illegals bill?
That's a good question, because on Twitter yesterday they're claiming, oh, no state funds went into this, but there has to be security. They closed down some streets. That those costs exist; they're real. But as far as I know, no one's ever tried to add it up.
What happened to Walsh's proposal for a 14% capital gains tax proposal? That was a surcharge actually on capital gains.
Right. I don't think it went through. I don't think it went through, but
nope.
Minnesota, unlike the federal government, Minnesota imposes their rate on all sorts of incomes, whether it's dividend, interest, capital gains, ordinary income. It's all taxed at the same rates. But I don't think the surtax on the capital gains went through.
Okay, here's a really good question. Why do you keep calling the palm a ficus?
Oh, it has to do with a funny TV commercial I saw a couple of weeks ago. It was an entire ficus rant, and so now every house plant is a ficus.
Okay, we got to get that straight. It's a palm, but we're going to call it a ficus.
It's a ficus to me.
Okay. Any funding for police?
Well, there's a lot of talk about more funding. There's more funding for every state agency. So there's more funding for the state police, more funding for the Bureau of Criminal. There's more funding for prisons. Every category of government got more funding. But a lot of what is counted as more funding for public safety is going to the violence interrupters, the social workers. So is it being funded in the way you and I would fund it? Certainly not. But with everything getting bigger dollars, you can't say there's no more funding or no additional funding for police.
Right. This is a question I'm not exactly sure the answer to, but I think I know. Mayo threatened to withhold money for this because of two big issues they were worried about: the nurse staffing ratio that allowed committees to decide what the staffing ratio should be in a hospital, and also the I call them death panels,
yeah,
but
death panel.
So we know the nurse staffing ratio died. Did the death panels also die? This whole cost?
So.
I think it did too.
The nursing thing for sure. So they had given Mayo and their Mayo hospitals a carve out from this idea that these nurse committees could determine staffing for each individual hospital. And so there's some study about nursing burnout and difficulty in retaining people in the profession. That stayed in there. There's some funding for that. But the idea that nurses were now in charge of staffing is gone. And so I think all of Mayo's concerns, and by extension, the hospital industry's concerns, one of the few things that they had announced that it was going to happen and in the end didn't.
Yep. Well, we are at an hour and we are really out of questions. I mean, the questions that have dried up, I mean, there's some we didn't answer, but I think we could probably stop. And we really do need to stop because most of the people watching work in the private sector.
Right.
And Governor Walz is going to need all of you to go back to work and get something done today and pay taxes to pay for all of this agenda that we went through. So we really shouldn't take any more of their time in the private sector. We need those tax revenues coming in to sustain this crazy agenda. Any last comments from you?
Yes, $9 billion in new taxes. Good luck.
Good luck. So thank you much for being on the webinar. I mentioned a couple of times our room full of interns eating pizza. That doesn't actually exist, although we're working. We have a couple interns, but the pizza does cost money. The interns cost money. Doing what we do costs money. We love to put on these programs. We have this is a webinar. We do a lot of in-person events. We testify at the legislature. We produce reports, research. All of it does take a little bit of money. So I'm not going to let you go before I ask for a fundraising plea. And conveniently, when you leave the webinar, you will be taken right to our fundraising page where you can easily put in your credit card and set up a recurring donation. Thinking Minnesota Magazine is a free magazine, but if you donate, you'll never get thrown off the list of Thinking Minnesota Magazine, a great benefit to donating as much as $10 or as little as $10 a month or whatever you can give today. So appreciate that, appreciate the help. Thanks everybody, and we're going to sign off.